And if that bothers anybody, just turn your camera off, and you should be a-okay. I'm going to drop a message in the chat periodically. I typed this up before our meeting because I always forget to include these things. And then at the end, I'm like, pissed, like I didn't do it. So here's this. Before we get started, I am going to buy, the next time we have a Q&A, so there's 2 more this month in December. I'm either going to buy the paid Zoom membership, or I'm going to have these on Google Meet, because Zoom limits me to 40 minutes because I just have the free version, and I haven't figured out how to record on Google Meet. So it's kind of like, if we're going to record it, I have to buy Zoom. So we'll see how that goes. I'm not opposed to it. I just haven't really had the need to yet. So, okay. Other points to point out. We've talked about recording. Yeah, so again, so we have about 40 minutes because of free Zoom. So the last couple of minutes I'm going to reserve just to talk to you guys about things. But other than that, you can go ahead and start dropping any questions that you have in the chat. Usually what I do is I just take a look at the chat as we're going, and I answer your questions. If it is helpful, I can always let you know if you have any questions about like my background and what I do. If that's helpful for you, let me know, and I can do that. But since we are on limited time, I don't want to waste your time talking about me if you already have like been through my portfolio or what have you. Yeah, so the last thing I wanted to point out before we start answering questions is just that we just wrapped up the first. Michelle is here. Oh, hi, Tom. Hi, loud rhymes. I'll post questions. Glad to be here. Thanks. Yeah. Hey, Tom, I'm so glad to see you. Tom is, if I'm not mistaken, Tom, if you land that piece, it'll be your first byline, right? Which is, correct me if I'm wrong. You could have tons of bylines and I'm just a dummy and don't know about them. But if so, I'll be really pleased for you. So please drop any questions that you have in the chat. While you're typing in your questions, I will go over that last point that I was going to make, which is just that we just wrapped up the first. Yes. Okay, good. I'm so excited then. I really want you to land that, and you're more than welcome to explain what that byline is if you want to other people, but I'm not going to steal your thunder. So I don't want to, I don't want to scoop you in the chat, so I won't do that. But anyway, so the last point was that we just wrapped up the first Bitchin' Writers case study program, and I'm really pleased with the way that it went. It was a 90-day program, and it was the first time I'd ever done anything like that. And we were able to boost almost everybody's acceptance rate. And some people said they had their best months overall that they'd ever had. So I was really pleased with that result. I'm going to be relaunching that in January. So not now, but January. So we're going to talk about that at the end. Otherwise, please drop your questions in the chat. I know that when people join in, they can't see previous chat questions. So I'm going to like re-copy and paste my own little message there from time to time, because something I realized is that a lot of folks don't know that I have a newsletter or a Patreon. Almost everybody in the Bitchin' Writers group did not know that I have a newsletter. And I was like, well, how the hell did you guys find me then? Because I thought that you came from the newsletter, and I was wrong. So, so I'm realizing that I don't always let people know what I'm up to, and I don't always give people the opportunity to support me. I know times are tough. So if you can't, don't fret. I just throw it out there because I realize I don't promote myself well enough. Okay. Jenny says, I'd love to hear tips. And again, we are recording tonight's session. So if that makes you comfortable, just turn your video off. But the reason I reread the questions is so that the people in the recording can hear what we're talking about. So Jenny says, I'd love to hear tips on getting into more new outlets. I struggle with that. Jenny, that is something I think that is a consistent struggle for everybody. And I'm glad that you asked that, because I'm kind of in a place right now where I'm trying to balance getting new publications with sort of taking the path of least resistance and pitching editors I already have relationships. Because as we all know, building editor relationships is probably like numero uno key when it comes to having a successful career, or at least successful enough to pay the bills. That was something, it's funny because when I first started out, every story I got was something that I had pitched, and I was pounding the pavement for every single story. It's only now that I actually have established some relationships with editors and have gotten some commissions. So that is actually has not been historically the case for my career. That's hateful of me. I shouldn't quotation marks my own career. It's my career. We'll call it that. Anyway, so One thing that you really need to do is the reading and put in the effort to make sure that you're precise and intentional with your pitch. So I kind of, I guess a good example would be my Cosmo story that I just did about crystal mining and how crystals are often, unbeknownst to the purchaser, mined by slaves and or children or both. And it's a really obviously problematic practice. I had never written for Cosmo before. I pitched their astrology editor, or actually I take that back. I pitched another editor. They passed my story along to the astrology editor. So in that case, I got really lucky because I pitched the wrong person. I pitched the wrong editor. And when that happens, as we all know, it's really difficult to, you're kind of like already down a point. You're playing from a deficit, right? So it's really hard to make that deficit up and get that editor to take your piece. So one thing that I did though with Cosmo was I felt like when I went on their site, I could see that they were talking about, I guess you would say, like witchcraft and new agey things. I needed a publication that was not afraid to touch those sort of, I don't know how you would describe it. I mean, witchcraft is what it is. Like people don't always like to cover it or talk about it because it has sort of a stigma. Not that I practice witchcraft myself, although I have many friends who do. And so I needed a publication that was liberal enough to be accepting of that topic, but also that tackled like beefy sort of investigation type feature stories. I needed a combo of both. So one thing that you have to do is be very intentional and precise with your pitch. Make sure that you do the reading, make sure it makes sense to send your pitch to that publication, because sometimes I'm very guilty of this. I just send my pitch to whomever that I think might be a good fit, and like 5 minutes of my time or a little extra digging would have told me that perhaps that was a risky pitch to send. Risky as in like it might not be accepted, not that the person is gonna like flame me for sending them a pitch, if that makes sense. um, so when you're sending pitches to new publications, always make sure you're finding the right editor of the right vertical. Always make sure that you do a little extra reading if you can, just because you're increasing your conversion rate, like you're increasing the likelihood of that editor to take your pitch. The other thing that I run into with writers sometimes is that they are afraid to pitch big publications because they feel like, I mean, we all have imposter syndrome, but just know that you never, ever, ever, like the rationale for sending a pitch should never be, I'm not experienced enough, in my opinion. There are other writers who will tell you differently, but as I tweeted earlier today, if you're a freelancer, you're not knocking on doors most of the time, you're having to kick them in. Every story that we get for the large part of our career is muscle and hustle. Like those are the only two things that get us any story. So never be like, oh man, I just don't know if I have the violent, like, again, some people don't always like my attitude toward pitching. I wouldn't say that I'm entitled, but if there's a room I want to be in, like I'm going to fucking be in that room and people can just do, they can think about how they want to think about it, I guess. And there are a lot of established journalists that don't want freelancers to be in certain rooms. So never let it hold you back. I kind of send a middle finger to those people. I just really hate the way that we can sort of play into these elitist stereotypes in journalism. So a little bit of extra time goes a long way, being precise, being intentional, and then don't let your own fear hold you back, because there's absolutely no reason why you cannot be the newest, hottest writer at a publication. Okay, I also struggle with balancing work. I take on a lot out of fear of money. Yeah, and then I'm a wreck. Yeah, that's a really serious problem for a lot of us. When I was at my last job before I started being full-time freelance, I would get up at 7 in the morning. I would take a call with a client because we had 7 a.m. meetings. And then I would go to work at 8:30. I'd get there half an hour early, do some client work. And then at 9, I would work my regular job. And then I would do my story interviews on my lunch break. And then I would come home and I would draft or do whatever copywriting I had to. So I get that. It is really difficult. Something I'm beginning to realize is that I'm really grateful to be where I am, but perhaps if I had been a little bit more intentional about those pitches that I was sending when I was still working full time, it would have furthered my career in important ways. So like the Blair Mountain story that I just did for Teen Vogue. If I had been doing stories like that while I was still at my full-time job, I have no doubt that I would have stronger relationships with the editors and it would be easier for me to get work, therefore reducing the amount of hustle that I had to do. A lot of that stuff I was doing it because I needed the money. And that's the unfortunate reality of, that was my rice cooker if you heard that beep. We're having vegan burritos. By we, I mean I, for dinner. So anyway, um, there's no one else here. I don't know why I said we. Anyway, so one thing I wish that I had done is, started to find those paths of least resistance. Like there's an editor here locally who has continuously been a champion of my work, and I'm so grateful to her. And if I had found those kind of connections while I was still at work when I left, it would have been a lot easier. That doesn't necessarily address what you're doing now, but just remember that self-care in this case is a business investment. Therapy is a business investment. Shout out to David, my therapist. I would not be able to keep it together without him. And I think looking back on that time in my life when I was so miserable because I was working all the time, if I had just stopped doing work for the sake of doing work and started being really thoughtful about where I wanted my career and the pieces I could do that would shape that career, that would have helped. And if I had also consistently reminded myself that like taking a day off, A, makes me more creative, and therefore B, it's an investment in my business. So sometimes it can be really difficult when you're like, oh shit, but the bills are due. I mean, I still have that fear all the time, but I have to tell myself like I'm not going to be in any shape to pay my bills if I don't take time off, because I'm going to be a wreck. And I get where you're coming from. There's not a whole lot of great answers about that because we live in a super capitalist society. But I hope that is helpful. And do remember to take time for yourself and be very intentional with the work that you do. You have a limited amount of hustle time. So use that time to do things that fall into your beat, into your niche, that establish relationships with editors. And I think that you'll find that it does somewhat over time reduce the amount of hustling you have to do. Do I follow up after sending the pitch? Yes, absolutely. So there are two types of stories. There are very timely stories and there are evergreen stories. If your story is very timely, i.e., like it's going to be old news next week, like when I was covering TikTok, TikTok moves very quickly. The trend will be over 2 days from now. And if you post it, people will fucking roast you in the comments. Okay. So if it's that kind of thing, if it's a timely trend, I start following up 2 to 3 days later. Again, there is a certain level of, like, everybody's different. Okay. There's no Bible to freelancing. You have to figure this out yourself. So you may be uncomfortable with that and you may feel like there are writers who say they always wait a week. I disagree with that strategy, but that's just me. And sometimes I do pitch stories that are more timely and they need to move faster. And I start following up on timely stories 2 to 3 days later. Now, in recent months, I have been focusing more on those even semi-evergreen pieces that could potentially have a month or two of life in them. And then I can wait a week to follow up, or 4 or 5 days versus 2 or 3 days. So yes, you always want to follow up. I follow up at least twice, 3 times if it's a pitch that was written for that specific publication, and it will be hard to take it somewhere else. And also a little tip, when I send that second follow up, I say, hey, I just wanted to follow up a final time to see if this pitch is a good fit. It's a little bit of a threat. Again, that may not fit your style, but it's helpful for me. And that way I let people know like, hey, I'm fucking moving on, bro. Like I got to sell this story. If you don't want it, cool. No skin off my teeth, but we're moving on. So I do try to be very clear with editors. I also use a single line follow up, just like I just gave you. Hey, I just want to follow up, see if this is a good fit. And that way, I think I have gotten away with being a little aggressive on the timing of my pitches because they're so short. You either sold the pitch in the pitch or you didn't. The follow up is not the place to sell the story. I know that we all want to, add additional detail. We're like, hey, man, I just want to remind you, this is a really good story and this is why. That is so tempting, but do not do that in your follow-ups. Okay, keep it short, keep it sweet, and then get out because either you sold it in the original or you didn't. Okay, I love the quote, never let the fear of striking out keep you from playing the game. Hell yeah, Mary, that's an awesome quote. Oh, my cat is having a sneeze attack. I'm sorry about that, guys. He's old, he can't help it. Anyway, so if you hear weird noises, it's probably my animals. Yeah, so yeah, never let the fear of striking out keep you from playing the game. And I promise you, there are a lot of people who wish you weren't playing the game. So, fuck them every day. That's all I have to say about that. Been writing forever and still a little nervous to pitch big outlets. Major imposter syndrome. Hey, Jenny, I know exactly how you feel. When I first started, Teen Vogue was like one of my biggest conquests. Like I had my first Teen Vogue byline in 2018. Believe at the time it was the biggest publication I had ever written for, and the piece honestly wasn't that great. One of the things about me is that I'm not perhaps the most prolific writer you'll ever meet in your life. However, I'm aggressive and I do what I have to do to pay my bills. So I'm willing, you know what? I may not be Mark Twain, baby, but I'm I'm making it happen. So that's one thing that I really appreciate about my career. So just know that like there are writers out there that are worse than you, okay? And probably most of them are straight white dudes, okay? And they're still pitching, even though they probably shouldn't be, okay? And so if anybody here falls into that category, I'm probably not talking about you, and I do apologize, but it is just the truth, okay? So do like my therapist says, all right? This is my free therapy for you all, okay? Hello, sir. You can sit here, that's fine. But you have to stop crying. I don't really care what you do, but you can't cry. He's 16 and he has 3 legs and AIDS and a heart murmur, so I don't really tell him no ever. Anyway, do what my therapist says and ask yourself, what would a mediocre white man do? Okay, and the answer is always they would just do the damn thing. So channel your inner white guy. As a non-binary person, I have enough masculine energy that I can like draw on that. So let your fuckboy come out. You know, that's what I try to do all the time. So don't let it hold you back. Okay, listen. My college was ranked the 11th worst school in the fucking country. Okay? So don't let anybody tell you that when it comes to imposter syndrome, I get to say, hey, I went to Columbia College Chicago. And people are like, the Columbia? And I'm like, no, man, not that one. Like, they think it's like Columbia. And I'm like, nah, it's Columbia College Chicago. Okay? The 11th worst. So talk to me about imposter syndrome. Okay, hi, thanks so much for this Q&A. Just 2 questions. How and where do you find good case studies? Ooh, how do you arrange an interview with a case study? What medium, email, phone, etc. is recommended for which kind of case study? Okay, Ashley, I may need a little bit of clarification here. So there's 2 different kinds of case studies in my world, and you tell me if I'm wrong. There's a case study that you might be running in order to get research and numbers, such as the case study I just did with the writers. They did pay to be in it. However, I was like giving and delivering content and taking their feedback and taking their data about pitches and such in order to put together whether or not I was helping them. And then the other kind of case study is like a copywriting case study. This might be what you're talking about because I also do copywriting. For a lot of copywriting clients, they may ask you to do things like reaching out to their customers, doing interviews, taking data about sales and marketing and putting it together in a package, sort of like copywriting package, so that they can post it. So those are the 2 kinds of case studies that I know about. But Ashley, if that's not what you're asking about, please let me know. Sorry, I'm in interviews to shape a piece and comment for an article. Hey, great, love that. Now we've also covered case studies for copywriting. So stick that one in your pot, let it simmer, because if you want to be a copywriter, you'll probably need to do that at some point, although I hate doing it. And if you, please don't ask me about copywriting case studies because it's not my forte. Okay, all right, so how and where do I find good sources? I'm gonna replace that. How do I find good sources and good interviews and what medium? Yeah, this is a really good question. And also, whoever said Mary, Harrow, yes, absolutely. If you guys are not on Harrow, help a reporter out. Sign up for it. It's free. You do have to be reporting for publications that have a certain level of social impact, like the local Tennessee Lookout doesn't count, but like Cosmo, your Teen Vogue, your AARP, MTV Insider, Vice, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All those are going to count. So if you're writing for like a national publication, even if it's not a US publication, if it hits a certain number of impressions, you can hop on Harrow, and basically they have a huge list and they send out your interview request to that list and you'll get those responses in your email. So yes, Mary, that's a very good point. And I love Harrow. I use it all the time. Also, there are 2 general kinds of sources: experts and people with lived experience. So when you're doing any kind of reported story, you want to make sure that you have both. You want to have experts who are maybe, or it depends on the kind of story. If you're doing a crime story, the experts might be local elected officials, police. They might be people who study crime data. If you're doing a story about COVID, your experts are going to be epidemiologists. They're going to be scientists. They're going to be elected officials who are creating COVID policy. So you always want to have interviews with people who are an expert in that field, who know what they're talking about. I find them through Harrow. I also find them by like going to, you can search like, I've done this so many times, African-American history studies professor. And then it will bring you up a list of, you'll see all kinds of universities who have professors under that heading at their college. You might search for organizations, professional organizations. Like I was recently a member, please don't laugh, of the National Association of Parliamentarians. So if you're looking for someone who understands the way business meetings and like the Constitution works, okay? You might try to find a professional organization that addresses the topic you're talking about, like the CDC, like a local environmental group. Basically, you're going to find anybody who knows experts in your area. A lot of the times that will be, like I said, professional or advocacy groups who deal in that subject material. I'm doing a story on a local neighborhood that's experiencing violence that the city won't help with. So I reached out to their neighborhood association. Even that could be considered an expert because you're doing advocacy for that neighborhood in that area. Your other topic or your other area of source that you're going to want is people with lived experience. So for example, I cover homelessness a lot for invisible people. I try to talk to actual people who have been homeless or are homeless as much as possible. There are tons of advocacy organizations that do work for homeless people, but a lot of those people have never lived on the street and they don't know what it's like. I mean, they're great people. Obviously, they're doing great work, but they just don't know what it's like. So when I need those like juicy story details from people who've been through it, that's you cannot leave those people out. I find a lot of those folks on Facebook. When I'm covering local news, I'm on local Facebook groups, East Nashville, HIP Donaldson, like whatever neighborhood I'm covering, I'm in a Facebook group for that. I'm joining a Facebook group for that. And I'm just posting, hey, I'm a local reporter. I'm covering X, Y, and Z. Please talk to me. You'll also see me DM or tweet out a lot. Hey, I'm looking for people who are into this weird sex thing because I write about sex a lot. So I'll be like, hey, I'm looking for people who are into this weird sex thing. DM me ASAP for a story. You do have to let them know you are doing a story, right? You have to be transparent about your purpose, but you can use social media a lot for those people with lived experiences. You can also ask, again, those same expert and advocacy groups to connect you with someone who has lived experience, particularly if it's in kind of a niche area. Or again, with homelessness, if you walk up to a homeless person on the street and you tell them you're a reporter, they're not going to fucking talk to you, and for good reason. They have no reason to trust you, and they have no reason to listen to anything that you say. So going through organizations that already have established lines of trust with particularly with marginalized individuals is a very good way to respectfully get contact with people who have lived experience. But do try to get creative. Try to come up with groups who work in, with, around, or about the topics that you're covering. And generally you can reach out to them and ask for help, and they'll help you because they're trying to raise awareness. So they're more than happy usually to help journalists. How do I arrange an interview? If it's a copywriting thing, if it's a blog post, I just did this yesterday. I'll do email interviews. I did some branded content for Teen Vogue today, and I did a phone interview because the client wanted it. But when it comes to copywriting and stuff that's not like journalistically, it doesn't have to have the same level of like accuracy. Like, I mean, it's not that my blog posts aren't accurate, but okay, we're not like investigating a crime junket here. Like, we're just writing about weird things for for clients, and I love my clients. I do the best that I can for them, but sometimes it's okay to do an email interview. I also do email interviews a lot with like music journalism because artists are busy. There are lots of times when I do email interviews. If you feel comfortable asking for an email interview, do so. And I have even done so in heavy investigations. I investigated a zoo here in Tennessee that has terrible, basically animal rights issues. They've been written up by like PETA and the USDA multiple times. And the owner, I knew he would not talk to me on the phone because he's like, he basically said that I was a conspiracy theory of myself, like my existence. He was a really great guy. So I knew that he wouldn't talk to me on the phone. So I took his statement via email. So even in bigger pieces, sometimes you may only get a source to talk to you via email, and that's totally fine. If you feel uncomfortable with it, you can always let your editor know, hey, just to let you know, this guy's only going to talk to me via email. If you're not sure if the publication accepts email interviews, you can always ask. However, I have not run into an issue with that. With AARP, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll do an email interview with the source, export their answers to a PDF, shove it in my source folder. I mean, you always do have to make sure that you give the proof of it, of the proof of that interview to your publication. I always do that anyway. But I do the phone when I have to. It's just that the phone is so mentally draining for me. So I do try to not do that unless it's an important kind of local story, big national piece, then I will for sure. Thanks to a Cinderella story. Oh, is that where that quote came from, I guess? Okay, pitching question for cold contact. Just share the pitch or introduce yourself, add links where you've written or no. Okay, so I have a pitch template. This is a really good question. I'm going to drop this message in the chat. Okay, so if you look at the Patreon, there's a lot of free stuff on the Patreon. Go to the latest Patreon post, and there is a template that you can download. It's a PDF and it's free. And basically, to answer your question, yes, I do introduce myself, but this will kind of visually show you, like, this is the template I use every single time with little deviation because it just works for me. So yeah, here's my intro. Hey editor, my name is Abby Lee Hood. I'm a Nashville-based freelancer and I have a pitch for Slate. And then I have my like suggested headline or like subject line again, and I bold it so that it visually breaks it up. And then I have the pitch idea, and then I say, hey, this is how many words I'm thinking. This is when I can have it to you by. Here are my bylines, or I'll say this is like verbatim because it's the same thing every time. Previous bylines in Huffington Post, MTV, Insider, Vice, and others may be found in my portfolio. And then I hyperlink my portfolio on the phrase in my portfolio. And that's it. But yeah, I highly recommend that you get that pitch template because it will visually show you what I've just told you. So yes, I do intro myself, meat of my pitch, always include word count and deadline, and then my portfolio. By the way, if you don't have bylines or a portfolio, no worries. You probably have lived experience or you have previous writing experience. So don't count yourself out because you don't have an extensive byline history. Tom, that goes out to you. I love you, friend. Tom has also been very helpful to me in the past, so I'm very glad that he is here. And anyways, I get that question all the time. So I just wanted to throw that out there. If you don't have bylines, guess what? You've written social media copy, or you've written an essay, or you volunteered at an organization, at an animal shelter, what have you. Like you have experience. I promise you. You may just have to dig to frame it in the right way. Okay. And there's nothing wrong with that. Kicking indoors, not knocking on them. Okay. You are so inspirational and great sense of humor. Hey, thank you. On the sense of humor, just know that my high school would not let me do stand-up in the senior talent show because they said I was too bad. That's a true story. I put together a routine for stand-up and they wouldn't let me do it. So, okay, cool. All right, so we're going past Ashley's comment. Harrow, yep. Also, there are a ton of organizations that are specifically marginalized groups of experts. Yes, e.g. Cite Black Women, Writers of Color, etc., that give diversity of perspective. Yes, absolutely. Something that I'll be really open with you guys, and this is very vulnerable. When I did my first piece for Cosmo, they made me sign a contract that said I would include at least 50% BIPOC sources. And obviously I'm not BIPOC. I'm a lot of things, but that's not one of the things that I am. So it was not like challenging, but it was difficult for me because I didn't already have a lot of those contacts and a lot of those relationships built. Because a lot of times we just get complacent and we do what's easy and we keep going back to the same people. So something that I am still challenging myself to do is, even if it's not a Cosmo piece, is to try and have at least 50% BIPOC sources. I'm also queer, so I do try to prioritize queer sources when I can. But yes, just a note on that. If you are not already challenging yourself, I'm vulnerable with you about it because I want to let you know that, like, if you're a white writer, you're probably not meeting that benchmark. Many of us don't meet that benchmark all the time. And I would challenge you, instead of beating yourself up, to just make that commitment internally and just know from now on, like, hey, I'm going to do my best to include diverse sources because there's always someone with a different perspective than the source that you've talked to. And our job is to translate the story in the most accurate way possible. And that includes diverse sources. So don't forget that. What do I use to transcribe interviews? My own self. So when I'm interviewing someone, here's the way that I do it. I have them on the phone, or today I had a Zoom call, and I have voice memos going on my laptop and I type in real time. It took me a long time. It took me several years to practice that. So what I do is I tell my source, hey, I'm going to mute you while you're talking because I don't want you to have to listen to me typing away on the keyboard. And just know that if you can't hear me, I'm still here. So I let them know, because sometimes they'll be like, hello, are you still there? And I'm like, yeah, I don't want you to have to hear me typing, because it's really annoying for them to hear you type that fast. However, for the Bitch and Writers interviews, for all the stuff that I do for Bitch and Pitchin' newsletter, a wonderful transcriber named Nicole Haas does all of my transcriptions. So if you're someone who does not want to transcribe your interviews, you can absolutely pay someone to do it. If you ever want to meet Nicole, I highly recommend her. And she charges $1 per minute. So I don't think that's changed in the last couple weeks since we did our last interview. So I transcribe in real time for my interviews, but if I'm unable to, or I don't want to for whatever reason, I do pay someone to do that, because I just find that I like to be effective and efficient, and that's one thing that I'm not efficient at. It would take me forever to listen to an interview and type it out. So it's either done in person or it's done after the fact by someone else. I use Zoom a lot for interviews. If you can schedule, yes, you can record the meeting just as we're doing right now. That is also very helpful if you are someone who prefers to, I mean, everybody works different ways. I know writers who would never, they don't really even take notes while they're interviewing because they want to put all their attention toward listening. And that's also fine. However you work is best for you. I used to rewrite my notes for like physics class when I was in school. So it makes a lot of sense if you need to go back to get that context and to get like the meat of what they're actually saying, or to even think of follow-up questions. You can absolutely record it. Tennessee is a one-party consent state, but do make sure that you let your source know that you're recording. And if they're uncomfortable with that, they'll usually let you know. I don't ask, I tell. Just because when I'm asking, it makes me sound like I don't know what I'm doing and I'm less confident. So I say something like, hey, I just wanted to let you know I'm recording today's interview to make sure that I get everything as accurately as possible. If you have any questions or concerns, let me know. All right, so let's get started. And I don't even give them time to say anything because if they have a problem with it, they'll let me know. I had a source record me one time because he was like, I don't like talking to reporters, so I'm going to record you. And I was like, okay, whatever. So that happens. People are weird, man. All right. Thank you. Been writing BizComms analyses for years. Yes. If you have been writing business communications and analysis, you have writing experience, mention that in your pitch. Like at the bottom of it, if you look at that free pitch template, it tells you where to put that. At the bottom of your pitch, make sure you mention like, hey, I've been in business communications. I've been a writer. You could even just say that. I've been a writer for 10 years, whatever it is. You can, if you want to link to things that you've done that are published that you feel are relevant with previous clients, that's great. Essentially, your qualifications are what makes you the right person to write the story. And the right person is not always going to have writing experience. The right person could be someone who lived on the streets. It could be someone who is currently dealing with food scarcity. Like those are things that absolutely make you the right person to write the story that are not writing. And I would say if you are living through issues, you're probably the right person to write it, the best person to write it. So don't feel like you have to have bylines. Although you do need to be at least a decent writer. You don't have to be great or prolific, as I'm not. Okay, I'm not out here writing grapes of wrath whenever I report. I have a portfolio, but it desperately needs a redesign. Jenny, here's what I recommend to you, my friend. Okay, if you go to abbyleehood.com/portfolio, it is in chronological order. And that is like, there are a lot of writers who are like, I cover travel. Here's my travel section. I'm like, I love that for you. I'm not a graphic designer. I'm shit at graphic design. I hate it. And I don't do it. I have one social media client, and please God, I hope they don't see this. And they make me like do all of their social media quote graphics, and I'm always on Canva being like, what's the background image I can use? Like, I'm just not. So if you look at my thing, it's on Squarespace, it's all drag and drop, and it's all in chronological order, and it's all very easy. And so far I haven't gotten any complaints. I always take whatever the lead image is, like so it's image, headline, the first line of the story, and then the link. And so far no one has complained about me using the image. Although I suppose if it's an independent photographer, you might ask. Tom says, happy to help anyone needing help analyzing data. I love that. Thank you, Tom. I may have to take you up on that at some point in time. Also, my cat's name is Tom, and he is leaving. I think he's going somewhere. He has a date. Okay. So we have 3 minutes and 50 seconds left. If you have any additional questions, please let me know. Again, I need to invest. Excuse me, I had an adult beverage before this, and so I have a little bit of the hiccups. I assure you, I'm over 21. It's very good to see you as well, Michelle. I realize that we've had some contact on Twitter, and I believe Michelle was a source for me for this AARP story that is somewhere in the ether. The editor is in the process of editing it, so that's what I know about that. Thank you, Michelle, for your time. I promise it will come and it will happen. Let you know. Yes, I will absolutely let you know when it posts and when it's live. Just to remind you guys, the Bitchin' Writers program is going to relaunch in January. We're going to start January 17th because I'm going to be on vacation for a couple of weeks. I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to be in my apartment recording a shitty bluegrass album. So I hope you all take a listen to that. But anyway, so yeah, the program is going to relaunch in January. It is 90 days. And we have different focuses every month. The first month is essentially, if there's anybody in the program who hasn't done a lot of feature reporting, we do cover feature writing and the basics of news writing. And then we get into how to scale up your income. The goal is for you to, if you're not making $2,000 a month when you leave that program, the goal is to have you the skills so that when you leave the program, you are making $2,000 a month. The problem is that there's a lot of video content, and I have found that people struggle to watch the content and show up in the weekly group calls and make all of those behavior changes. So it may take some time for you to hit those goals, but that is what we focus on. And then we also talk about networking, building editor relationships. And the third month is promoting yourself on social media. So we do talk about like portfolio design and also how to get in these Facebook groups and promote yourself, because the AARP stuff, which has been extremely high paying so far, $1 a word. It's one of the last few that do, that came to me through Facebook. So you never know where you're going to find work. We also talk about copywriting. I have a couple of copywriting clients now. I've had several more in the past. So that's something that we cover. So anyways, keep looking on my Twitter and the Bitch and Pitchin' newsletter for updates about that. I'm going to copy and paste this message one more time. If you want more information about that course, it is on my website, and I believe I linked it. Yes. Okay, cool. So there's my fucking marketing, whatever. Where can we listen to the Bluegrass album? Congrats. I don't know. I'll probably put it on Spotify. I did an EP when I was 19, and I put it on Bandcamp, and it like did fine. I've always played music, but at some point it became apparent to me that music was not going to, be the thing that I did for a career. And so it's fun, and I love doing it, and I really want to make this weird like conceptual bluegrass album, and it's gonna have some weird stuff in it. I mean, it's just a reflection of me as a person, I guess. So I've always played fiddle my whole life, so I'm just gonna take a couple weeks off and make an album in my apartment, and as the kids do it these days. Hey, you know what? I'm hopeful that it was enlightening, actually, or Ash. This has been wonderful, Tom. That's one word for it. And thanks for the emails with templates. Yeah. So if anybody needs anything, we have less than a minute left on this call. If you need anything, my DMs and my email are always open. That's why I mentioned my email. Please do use it. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm always around. If we didn't get to your question here, you can always find me on the internet, and I'll do my best to help you. So I hope